The wheelchair wheel screeched against the polished floor of the Veterans Affairs Hospital, and for a moment, every single person in that waiting room fell silent. Sergeant Michael Sullivan sat frozen, both arms wrapped in fresh bandages, his legs unmoving beneath a thin hospital blanket, his eyes staring at nothing at all. Two soldiers flanked him like statues, a military dog sat obediently at his side, and yet not one doctor in that entire building was willing to step forward and touch him. They had read his chart. They had heard the whispers. And they had decided, quietly and cowardly, that Michael Sullivan was simply too far gone to save. If a story like this moves something inside you, if you believe that broken men still deserve a second chance, then I want you to hit that like button right now, drop a comment below telling me you're watching, share this video with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this one. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 6 months earlier, Michael Sullivan had been one of the most respected snipers in the entire United States Navy SEAL community. His teammates didn't call him Michael on the battlefield. They called him Ghost, because he could disappear into any terrain and reappear exactly where the enemy least expected him. He had over 200 confirmed missions, a chest full of medals he never talked about, and a reputation for bringing every single one of his brothers home alive. But on his last deployment, during an ambush in a valley that intelligence had sworn was clear, an IED tore through the vehicle behind him, and shrapnel severed something deep in his spine. He woke up in a military hospital overseas with doctors telling him, in careful, clinical voices, that he would likely never walk again, and that the nerve damage in both arms might never fully heal either. When he was finally transferred back to the United States, to a VA hospital in Ohio, Michael was not the same man who had once moved through enemy territory without a sound. He was silent in a different way now, hollow, angry, and terrified in a way he had never allowed himself to be on the battlefield. Chronic pain racked his body every single hour. His hands trembled uncontrollably when he tried to hold a pen or a spoon. Doctors came and went, glancing at his chart, at the notes about his combativeness, about the outbursts he'd had during physical therapy when the pain became unbearable and grief swallowed him whole. Word spread quickly among the staff. He's difficult. He's unpredictable. He's dangerous. One by one, doctors began finding reasons to pass him along to someone else's rotation. On the morning this story truly begins, Michael had been wheeled into the hospital for what was supposed to be a critical evaluation, one that would determine whether he qualified for an experimental spinal treatment program, his last real hope of ever standing on his own 2 feet again. But the moment the attending physician saw the thick folder attached to his file, thick with warnings and incident reports, he simply shook his head and told the charge nurse to find someone else to handle the consultation. Then a second doctor did the same. And a third. Michael sat there in that wheelchair, wrapped in bandages, surrounded by armed guards because military protocol required it during his transport, and he heard every single word of what those doctors said about him, spoken just loud enough for him to hear, as though he weren't even a person anymore. His jaw tightened. His eyes, once sharp enough to spot a target from 1,200 yards away, now stared blankly at the floor tiles, refusing to let anyone see the humiliation burning inside him. This was worse than any wound he had taken overseas. This was being erased while still alive. That was the exact moment Nurse Rebecca Whitfield walked into the room. Rebecca was 29 years old, a trauma nurse who had transferred to the VA hospital 18 months earlier after her own younger brother, a Marine, had come home from Afghanistan with wounds that no one else seemed willing to look past either. She had seen this pattern before, the way broken warriors got quietly abandoned by a system that only knew how to celebrate soldiers, not heal them. She had heard the doctor's whispers in the hallway. She had seen the fear in their eyes when Michael's chart was passed around like something contagious. And when she walked into that room and saw a decorated Navy SEAL sitting alone, surrounded by people too afraid to help him, something inside her simply refused to look away. She didn't reach for his chart first. She didn't ask him where it hurt. Instead, she knelt down in front of his wheelchair, looked directly into his hollow eyes, and asked him a single question that no one else in that hospital had bothered to ask in 6 long months. She asked him what they used to call him on the teams. For a moment, Michael said nothing at all. His throat tightened, and something behind his eyes flickered, just barely, like a candle catching wind for the first time in ages. Then, in a voice roughened by disuse and grief, he told her. "Ghost." Rebecca smiled softly, and instead of pity, what Michael saw on her face was something he hadn't been shown in months: respect. She leaned in close enough that only he could hear her, and she whispered his call sign back to him, softly, like she was handing him back a piece of his own identity that the hospital system had stripped away. She told him that a ghost doesn't disappear because he's broken. A ghost disappears because he chooses when and where to be seen. And right now, she said, it was time for Ghost to be seen again, by people who deserve to see him. Something shifted in that room. The armed guards who had stood rigid and silent finally exhaled. The military dog rested its head against Michael's leg. And for the first time since the explosion that changed his life, Michael Sullivan felt like a human being again, not a liability, not a warning label on a folder, but a man who had once run into danger to save others and now simply needed someone brave enough to run toward him. Rebecca didn't stop there. She marched straight to the hospital administrator's office, chart in hand, and refused to leave until she was assigned as his primary care nurse. She fought through red tape, she fought through the whispered concerns of doctors who still doubted him, and she personally advocated for Michael to be accepted into the experimental spinal treatment program that every single other physician had quietly written him off from. She sat with him through therapy sessions when the pain made him want to give up entirely. She learned the particular cadence of his silence, the difference between the silence of pain and the silence of shame, and she never once treated him like he was something to be managed instead of someone to be healed. Weeks turned into months. The treatment was brutal, filled with small victories and devastating setbacks, days where Michael's hands shook so badly he couldn't even hold a cup of water, and days where something in his legs twitched for the very first time since the explosion. Rebecca was there through every single one of them, never with pity in her eyes, but always with that same steady respect she had shown him on the very first day, the respect of someone who saw not a broken soldier, but Ghost, a man who had once protected an entire team and now simply needed someone willing to protect him back. If this story has touched something in your heart, if you believe that one person's compassion can change the entire course of someone's life, please take a moment right now to like this video and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. It means more than you know, and it helps this story reach the people who need it most. Nearly a year after that first encounter in the hospital hallway, Michael Sullivan stood. Not for long, not without support bars gripped tightly in trembling hands, but he stood, on his own legs, in front of the same nurses and doctors who had once refused to even look at him. Rebecca stood beside him, tears streaming freely down her face, and when Michael finally managed 3 unsteady steps forward, the entire room erupted, doctors who had once turned him away now applauding through their own tears, understanding at last what they had almost let slip through their fingers. Before we reach the end of this story, I want to ask you for one small thing. If you have ever known someone who felt invisible, someone the world gave up on too soon, type the words "I see you" in the comments below. Let's fill this space with reminders that no one, soldier or otherwise, should ever have to fight alone. Michael Sullivan never returned to combat, but he found a new mission. He now works alongside Rebecca at that very same VA hospital, mentoring newly wounded veterans who arrive broken, angry, and terrified, the very same way he once did. He tells them all the same thing Rebecca once whispered to him, that being a ghost was never about disappearing. It was about choosing, when the moment came, to be seen by the one person brave enough to look. And somewhere in that hospital, on quiet mornings when the sun rises over Ohio, you can still find Sergeant Michael Sullivan walking those hallways, slowly, deliberately, on legs the world once told him would never carry him again, proof that sometimes, all it takes to save a life already given up on is one person willing to whisper a name and truly mean it.